Three women vanish from the same house, on the same night, without a struggle. Their cars are still in the driveway. Their purses are still on the floor. Their dog is still inside, barking at nothing. And 33 years later, not one of them has ever been found, dead or alive. No body, no suspect ever charged, no confession that checked out. This is the case that changed how Missouri investigates missing persons. And it started with something as small as a broken porch light. Before this was a case file, it was 3 lives. Sherrill Levitt was 47, a cosmetologist at a local salon, known for her curly bleach blonde hair and the freckles across her chest and neck that her friends teased her about. She was a single mother, and by every account, fiercely close with her daughter. That daughter was Suzie Streeter, 19 years old, 5'2", with a scar on her forearm and a small mole at the corner of her mouth that people said made her look like she was always about to smile. Suzie had just graduated high school. She had her whole life still folded up in front of her, untouched. And then there was Stacy McCall, 18, Suzie's close friend. Dark blonde hair, down to the middle of her back, a dimple in her chin, freckles across her face from a Missouri summer that hadn't even really started yet. On the night of June 6, 1992, Stacy and Suzie graduated from Kickapoo High School together. They went out that night the way graduates do. Parties, friends, a whole town celebrating the same milestone at the same time. By sunrise, all 3 of them were gone, and nobody has seen them since. After the ceremony, Stacy and Suzie hit a string of graduation parties around Springfield. At one point, the plan was to crash at a friend's house, but it was crowded, and the girls decided against it. So instead, sometime around 2:15 a.m. on June 7th, they left one of the parties and drove to Suzie's house, the home she shared with her mother, Sherrill, at 1717 East Delmar Street. That 2:15 a.m. sighting is the last confirmed moment anyone outside that house ever saw Suzie or Stacy alive. According to police, everything about their arrival suggests they made it home safely. Their clothing was there, their jewelry was there, their purses, their car keys, all of it, sitting in the house like they'd just stepped into another room, somewhere between 2:15 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. in that house, on that ordinary residential street, Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy disappeared. The first person to sense something was wrong was Janelle Kirby, a friend of Stacy's. The girls had plans to go to Whitewater, a local water park, and were supposed to leave from Kirby's house that morning. When Stacy and Suzie never showed up, Kirby and her boyfriend, Mike Henson, drove to the Delmar Street house to check on them. The front door was unlocked. All 3 cars were parked outside, but nobody answered. Kirby noticed the glass globe on the porch light had been shattered, though the bulb itself was untouched. Barefoot, she asked Henson to sweep up the broken glass so she wouldn't cut her feet. That single, well-meaning decision would later become one of the most painful details in the entire case. Because that shattered glass was the only physical sign, the only one, that anything violent might have happened at that house, and it was swept into a dustpan and thrown away before police ever saw it. Hours later, Stacy's mother, Janice McCall, arrived. She'd been calling all day with no answer. What she found inside would haunt this case for the next 3 decades. The family dog, a Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, came running at her, frantic, crying. The television was on, showing nothing but static, like someone had been watching a movie the night before and simply never turned it off. And then Janice saw the purses, all 3 of them, Sherrill's, Suzie's, and Stacy's, sitting in a row on the bedroom floor. Sherrill's purse still had close to $900 in it, a cash deposit from the salon she never made it to the bank with. Stacy's clothes from the night before were folded neatly on the bed, but her t-shirt and underwear, what she would have slept in, were missing. No struggle, no forced entry, just an empty house that looked like 3 women had simply stepped outside for a moment and never come back. And the smaller details are almost worse than the big ones. Sherrill's cigarettes were still sitting untouched in the house, which struck everyone who knew her, because friends and family described her as a committed chain smoker who would never willingly leave a pack behind. Next to Susie's cigarettes sat an unfinished can of Coke. On her headboard, propped up like she'd just set it down, was a copy of Dr. Seuss's "Oh, the Places You'll Go," a graduation gift, the kind of book you give someone on the exact night these women disappeared. The lights in Susie's room were off, and her television was just showing static, the way a TV looks after a movie ends and nobody gets up to turn it off. Every single object in that house told the same story, an ordinary night that ended in the most ordinary way, winding down, getting ready for bed, interrupted by something that left no mess, no blood, and no sound anyone heard. Here's where this case takes a turn that still makes investigators wince. Janice McCall, standing in that house, terrified, picked up the phone to call the police. Before she did, she noticed the answering machine had a message waiting. She played it. She would later describe it only as a strange message. She has never fully detailed what it said, because in the process of listening to it, on a machine that automatically erased messages after a single playback, standard for answering machines in 1992, it was gone, permanently. No backup, no recording, no way to ever hear it again. Police, when they eventually reviewed the case, said they were very interested in that message. They believed it might have contained a clue to what happened. They were also clear that it didn't seem connected to a string of prank calls Kirby had separately received. Whatever was on that tape walked out of this case with nobody realizing it was the most important piece of evidence they'd ever have. Now here's the detail that separates the Springfield Three from almost every other cold case in America. The sheer number of people who walked through that crime scene before it was ever treated as one. Stacy's parents didn't report her missing to police until more than 16 hours after she was last seen. In that window, friends, neighbors, and family members came in and out of the house, worried, confused, trying to help. Investigators later estimated that somewhere between 10 and 20 people had been inside that house before law enforcement secured it. They emptied ashtrays, they washed coffee cups, they swept up glass. They tidied a home that may have been an active crime scene, because none of them yet understood that it was one. By the time police finally arrived, the scene had already been sanitized by grief and good intentions. Investigators would spend the next 30 years trying to reconstruct a moment that had been erased before they ever got the chance to examine it. Every cold case has a name that keeps coming back. In the Springfield Three case, that name is Dustin Recla. Recla was Susie's ex-boyfriend. A few months before the disappearance, in February 1992, he and two friends, Michael Clay and Joseph Riedel, broke into a mausoleum at a Springfield cemetery. They vandalized a crypt, stole a skull and bones, and Recla pawned the gold fillings from the skull for $30. Suzie gave police a statement about what the men had done. She was expected to be a witness against Recla in court, and according to accounts from people close to the case, threats had allegedly been made against Suzie and her mother after she talked to investigators. Recla and his two friends were confirmed to have been together in the Springfield area on the very night the three women vanished. Police brought him in. He took a polygraph test. He denied any involvement and passed. He was never charged in connection with the disappearances. He eventually moved out of Missouri entirely, but the timing, a witness against him vanishing before she could testify, is the kind of detail that keeps true crime forums awake at 2 a.m., even now. There's another layer to this that doesn't get talked about enough. When police searched the home of Recla's friend Michael Clay, they reportedly found what looked like a small altar, an image of a pentagram, candles arranged deliberately, and an animal skull. By the time investigators came back the next day to look again, all of it was gone, no explanation given. Recla was also said to have connections to the Galloping Goose Motorcycle Club, a group law enforcement knew for a documented history of violence. None of this proves anything on its own. But stack it together, the mausoleum break-in, the missing witness, the vanished altar, the motorcycle club ties, and you start to understand why Recla's name has never fully left this case, even decades after he passed his polygraph and walked free. Both Clay and Recla ultimately received probation for the cemetery vandalism. Neither has ever been charged with anything related to the disappearances. To this day, that remains the official record, but it hasn't stopped 3 decades of investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives from circling back to February 1992 and to a skull with missing teeth, as the moment this story might have actually begun. About a month after the disappearance, investigators got a tip that seemed almost too specific to ignore. A woman living roughly a mile from the Levitt house told police that at around 6:30 a.m. on the morning of June 7th, hours after the women were last seen, she witnessed a van driving through her neighborhood. She said the driver was a young woman who appeared to be crying. She said she heard a man's voice from inside the van, telling the driver not to do anything stupid. It wasn't until she later saw a missing persons poster that she recognized the driver. She believed it was Suzie Streeter. Police took the report seriously enough to purchase an identical make and model of van and put it on public display, asking anyone with information about it to come forward. Despite an outpouring of tips and an extensive search, the van lead never connected to a suspect, a location, or a resolution. It remains one of the case's most tantalizing and most unresolved threads. In 1997, 5 years after the women disappeared, a man named Robert Craig Cox, a convicted kidnapper and robber sitting in a Texas prison, told a Springfield News leader reporter something that made headlines across the country. Cox claimed he knew the 3 women had been murdered. He said their bodies would never be found. Cox had lived in Springfield in 1992. When investigators first interviewed him after the disappearance, he said he'd been with his girlfriend at church the morning after the women vanished, an alibi that would later be called into question. Here's the problem. Investigators who worked this case have been consistent for nearly 30 years about one thing. They do not believe Cox has any credibility. He was never charged. His claims have never been corroborated by any physical evidence, and law enforcement has openly said he is considered an unreliable narrator. But he's never been definitively ruled out either. And in a case with this little to go on, we don't believe him, but we can't disprove him, is its own kind of haunting. The final name that keeps surfacing in this case belongs to a man named Larry Dwayne Hall. Hall was a suspected serial killer who traveled around the Midwest attending Civil War historical reenactments, and is believed to have abducted, assaulted, and murdered numerous women and girls across multiple states. Here's what makes his name impossible to fully dismiss. Wilson's Creek National Battlefield sits just minutes from the Kirby residence, one of the last places connected to the girls before they disappeared. And there were 2 Civil War reenactments happening in a town 30 minutes from Springfield on the very morning and afternoon of June 6, 1992, hours before the women vanished. Investigators looked into Hall. No conclusive connection to the Springfield Three has ever been established, but the overlap in timing and geography is the kind of coincidence that true crime investigators, professional and amateur alike, simply cannot let go of. Add to this list Gerald Carnahan, later convicted in an unrelated 1985 rape and murder, who was investigated and ruled out, and Sherrill's own son, Bart Streeter, who was looked at early on and cleared after an alibi confirmed by his girlfriend and a neighbor, along with a past polygraph test. 4 names, 4 dead ends, 0 arrests. It's worth sitting with that for a second. This isn't a case where investigators never had anyone to look at. It's the opposite. They had an ex-boyfriend with a motive and no alibi that fully satisfied everyone, a career criminal claiming inside knowledge from behind bars, a suspected serial killer with a documented pattern and a battlefield 5 minutes from the scene, and a family member who was cleared but never fully escaped public suspicion. 4 plausible threads, pulled by professional investigators for over 30 years, and every single one of them ran out before it reached a courtroom. That's the part of this case that separates it from a typical missing persons file. It's not that nobody looked. It's that everybody who looked hit the same wall. No body, no forensic evidence, no confession that held up, and a crime scene that had already been cleaned by the time anyone with a badge walked through the door. In 1997, Sherrill Levitt and Suzie Streeter were legally declared dead. Stacy McCall's mother, Janice, refused to do the same for her daughter. She said publicly that until remains are found, she will never call this closed. Since 1992, the Springfield Police Department, working with the FBI and the Missouri State Highway Patrol, has processed more than 5,000 tips. They've searched rural properties, lake beds, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings across the Ozarks. They have never recovered a single piece of physical evidence connecting any person to what happened inside that house. The case remains open. It's still listed on the Springfield Police Department's cold case page. Officers still take calls about it. In 2020, a former Springfield Business Journal reporter and his father published a novel inspired by the case, and a New York journalist with roots in Springfield launched a multi-episode podcast retracing every step of that night. Documentaries have picked it up. True crime channels, including this one, keep coming back to it because 33 years later, it still hasn't given up its ending. And every June, on the anniversary of that graduation night, the story resurfaces in Springfield itself. Old missing posters, the same ones Janice McCall printed and hung around town in the days after her daughter vanished, still hang in a few local storefronts. Faded now, but still there. Somewhere in Missouri, someone might still know exactly what happened and has simply never said it out loud. 3 women, 1 house, a porch light that got swept away before anyone knew it mattered, and an answering machine message that vanished before anyone knew it was evidence. 33 years later, that's still all we have. Somewhere, someone knows what happened on East Delmar Street. Maybe they've carried it for 33 years. Maybe they don't even realize what they know matters. If you have any information about the disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, or Stacy McCall, you're asked to contact the Springfield Police Department at 417-864-1810 or Crime Stoppers at 417-869-TIPS. That tip line is still open. It has been for 33 years. Before you go, I want to ask you something, because I think it says a lot about this case. If you had walked into that house that morning, what's the one detail you think you would have noticed first? The purses on the floor, the erased message, or the porch light that got swept away? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. This case isn't closed, and when the next lead breaks, whether it's a new tip, a new search, or a name we haven't covered yet, you'll be the first to know. Make sure you're subscribed, with the bell on, because somewhere, this story isn't over yet.